Welcome to the Northeast PBIS School-Wide Mini Module Training Series. I'm Marcy Handler, and I'm here with Karen Roby. We are both trainers for the Massachusetts PBIS Academy. Today's module is Understanding the Function of Behavior, Part 2. Part 1 focused on understanding the concept at an individual level, and Part 2 will broaden that understanding to the school-wide level. The symbol on the left-hand side of your screen indicates where in your Getting Started workbook you can find more information on these topics. As a brief review, in Part 1, we discussed how all behavior has a purpose, also known as a function. It doesn't mean that a behavior is good or bad. It simply means that the behavior works for an individual because it allows them to either obtain something desirable or escape or avoid something undesirable. And we reviewed this diagram showing us that the more frequently the behavior works in obtaining or avoiding something, the more likely that behavior will be reinforced and we continue to use the same or similar behavior in the future. When someone obtains or gets something desirable as a result of a problem behavior, this is considered positive reinforcement because something is being added to the environment. When someone escapes or avoids something undesirable as a result of the problem behavior, the behavior is still being reinforced or strengthened, but this time it's called negative reinforcement because something is being taken away or subtracted from the environment. Lastly, we presented a visual to consider how to make better decisions about adjusting the environment or intervening to reduce the likelihood of that problem behavior from happening based on the function of behavior. Consider antecedent changes as those things that can be done to prevent the behavior from happening. Then consider, is there a different behavior that could be taught so the individual can still get or obtain what they want, or avoid what they don't want, but in a more appropriate way? Are there social skills or coping skills that they need to learn? And then the consequence is how we respond to that behavior. The new behavior is strengthened or reinforced, while the inappropriate behavior is diminished based on how we respond. So then how do we consider function across students? Actually, function-based support includes the same features. First, it's an understanding that the logic behind function is grounded in behavioral theory. Then, by applying this logic, the same or similar environmental features can be modified as they relate to the function. It also includes understanding how the behavior has been or is being reinforced, and focuses on new behaviors that are as effective or efficient as the other behaviors. Sometimes we consider replacement behaviors as a term to apply there, and we want to focus on teaching replacement behaviors. Finally, function-based support should include considerations for the adult behaviors that will be needed in order to redesign the learning environments and provide opportunities for reinforcement of new behaviors. So we apply the same function-based logic whether we're considering interventions for individuals, whole classes, or whole schools. And we use this framework where we think about the antecedent as what typically precedes the behavior itself, and the consequence, what typically flows from that behavior, as a way to observe patterns across time. If we can notice and have data relative to those patterns, we can infer the probable function of the behavior. Let's look at an example of how we would consider this from the individual and more of a group-based or school-wide approach. In this example, in the hallway with peers and few adults around, Tim and a group of other boys often bump, shove, or put their hoods up from other students, put on the hoods of other students while they're in the hallway. Each time, Tim's peers laugh and high five him. When asked about the behavior, they say, "Oh, we're just kidding around." Has anybody seen this in the hallway?
I have, way too often.
So what do you think the antecedent is in this example?
Well, I think that they're trying to transition from class to class with a bunch of peers. Sometimes it may even be happening when there are fewer adults in the hallways.
That's right. So that tells us what's preceding the behavior. What's the behavior of concern?
They're bumping, they're shoving, and other forms of horseplay or teasing.
Right. And what's the consequence?
Well, it sounds like Tim and his friends get a laugh or other types of social attention from their peers.
So what do you think is the presumed or likely function here?
It seems like they're trying to get that attention from their peers.
Right. So if we know the function, we can also go back to our function-based support model and consider how will we then prevent, teach, and respond differently? What can we do to prevent the problem behavior in this example?
Well, if I was a teacher in that school, maybe I would try to increase the number of prompts or that I provide to my students, or have more active supervision by adults in the hallway. Maybe they need more monitoring at certain periods of time than others.
That's a great idea. What will we also need to teach to the students?
I think they need to learn more respectful behaviors towards their peers, and the difference between kidding around with friends and what teasing is.
Right. And how will we respond differently to reduce attention from peers?
Maybe teach the other kids to ignore teasing to lessen the peer attention, or to say stop, that's not cool, so that the attention that the other kids are getting is not positive attention.
Right. And how can adults reinforce more appropriate or respectful behavior?
Well, by providing praise like thumbs up or verbal feedback, maybe if the school has ticket systems or something like that, um, and to do that whenever they see students engaging in appropriate behavior in the hallway.
Great ideas. With these strategies, we've increased the likelihood of respectful behavior happening and being reinforced so that it continues to happen. And we've minimized attention for the disrespectful behavior. We've given kids another way to get what they want. Over time, it's helpful to come back as a team and see how these strategies are working. Maybe determine if anything needs to be adjusted in any of these areas. Let's look at another example. An assistant principal found that over 30% of their behavioral incident reports in the school were coming from the cafeteria, many of which included issues around personal space while waiting in line for food or while they were in line heading back to class. I'm sure we've seen this happen in many schools as well. What do you think the antecedent is in this condition, in this example? Perhaps too many children lining up at once, perhaps some confusion over which line to be in for what food, or that pressure of trying to feel like you have to get your food quickly or risk not getting a seat where you want it. Let's not forget that hunger plays a role in everyone's tolerance for waiting as well. All those can be considered under the antecedent factors. The behavior is arguing with adults, maybe with peers, maybe some physical contact in this example. And our immediate consequence is getting your space in line and your food faster is just more effective than being polite. So what's the function here?
Well, I think they're trying to get something. They're trying to get to their lunch.
Absolutely. And those behaviors, while we may find them inappropriate, really do work a lot of the times.
Yeah.
So if we take a function-based approach and look at that from our school-wide lens, or what would work or what would be needed for most or all kids, we find that we could prevent some pieces of that by changing the way students line up. Maybe include some additional visuals that help them know where to go or how to move through the cafeteria, who gets online first and when they're exiting as a class. We could also teach and prompt ways of actually waiting more appropriately. What do I do if I'm waiting on the line and I'm hungry but impatient? Are there ways I can start a conversation with other kids or think about what comes after lunch? And we could also reinforce the actual behavior that waiting is something adults could acknowledge. They can move through the cafeteria, give feedback to students along the way, and that by all of us being a little more patient, we move through the line quicker. So why is taking this function-based approach so important? Here are some helpful reminders to consider. If you can examine patterns in behavior across school and classroom environments using your school-wide data, then your team can better connect those interventions to assumed functions of behavior. They'll be more meaningful and more effective. That means being able to modify your environments in a way that focuses on preventing those challenging behaviors, making them irrelevant, and creating new behaviors that will be easier and more effective to use. And by determining what supports, either tools or skills adults might need to reinforce the new behaviors that are being demonstrated and reinforce or reduce the reinforcement for problem behaviors, we can find more meaningful ways for students to get what they want or escape what they don't want. Take some time now to think about a school-wide problem you have identified through some observations or discipline referral data that your school may be collecting. Use this chart that can be found in your Getting Started workbook, section 5A. First, identify patterns and antecedents, what the challenging behaviors are, and a common consequence that's maintaining the behavior. Decide what function it generally serves. Then consider ways that you can apply that prevent, teach, respond model. How can the environment be rearranged to prevent problems? And what social skills or coping skills will students need to meet that function? What are meaningful consequences that reinforce more appropriate behavior and decrease or reduce the reinforcement for inappropriate behavior? Lastly, are there any skills or changes in routines that we need to consider for staff, for them to learn new ways of approaching the problem or how to provide reinforcement for those new and appropriate behaviors and less reinforcement for the challenging behaviors? If you don't have an example to consider from your school, here are two for you to think through. Thank you. And if you have any questions on how to apply this function-based support, please reach out to your trainers for assistance.